My name is Coetsee, and I work for our family business called Mogalakwena Craft Art. And basically the only reason that I'm sitting here or standing here in front of you is that Gretchen Aranjis over there, who's one of your fellows, wrote an article about our business last year, which won a prize, and she went to Rio to go and discuss it at the summit. So thank you to her as well. I work for our family business called Mogalakwena Craft Art. And there are a couple of different aspects that we'll discuss, craft art being one of them, and social entrepreneurship, trying to define what it actually is, because we'll have a conversation just now and you'll see how difficult it is to actually put your finger on what exactly social entrepreneurship is and what it's not. Before I can tell you the story about our business, and I'd love to be able to tell a story to say, well, this is what we envisaged back in 1994, and this is how we grew, and this is where we are now, 19 years later. But I think any entrepreneur would be able to tell you, and I know there are some in the room, that that's not how it works. You use trial and error, and you figure your way out, and you learn some things. You usually learn more by the mistakes that you make. But before I can do that, I just have to give you a little bit of context about South Africa. I know you've covered it in your sessions to date. But of the 48.6 million people in South Africa, we've got a situation where we have 28% of our population which is HIV positive. We have the third highest unemployment rate in the world. And what that means for us basically is that 50% of the young would-be workers are unemployed. So 50% of that 48 million people, of the employable people, are unemployed. This leaves us in a situation in South Africa where we have structural challenges for businesses growing. First of all, the lack of infrastructure, roads, hospitals, schools, etc. The lack of investment in human capital, people coming out of schools that are either not employed or unemployable, and finally the impact of HIV and what it is not just on our society but also on the businesses in South Africa. So even though you know where we are down here in the bottom star in Cape Town, Mogalakwena Craft Art is based up in the remote rural north of Limpopo province. Now Limpopo province is the northernmost province of South Africa. It's flanked by Botswana, Zimbabwe and Mozambique, as you can see there. It's a province in South Africa which is known for its wonderful wildlife areas, beautiful nature, great resources, but also it's one of the poorest provinces in South Africa, rife with poverty and very high HIV infection rates as well. So we are based, if you look at, that's Limpopo province, right at the very north of that, against the Limpopo River. Any person into logistics, that's a nightmare trying to do anything from there down to Cape Town. In the 1980s, our family was fortunate enough to buy a farm up against the Limpopo River where we did some small-scale farming, and only after we moved there did we realize that our farm borders a tribal trust area called the Leboa Tribal Trust, and this area is spread out over 250,000 hectares, and more than 1.5 million people live up there. What we have in this area is 60% unemployment of the employable people, and more than 60% of the local population is HIV positive. Most of them are illiterate and obviously unemployable, not having any employable skills. Now, I'd once again love to be able to tell you that when we arrived there, we were just altruistic and thought we can do something to change this. But I think if you're looking at a state where you have 900,000 unemployed people, you don't know how to compute that. What we looked at first of all is to say 900,000 people unemployed, we need to do something to change our stature and our situation in the community. Otherwise it's obvious a situation where you have a small group of people who have, and many, many people who have not. These people are living on less than $1 a day and dependent on government grants for parents and for the elderly. So this is what the area looks like where we are based. And in 1994, my mother initiated a project called Mogalakwena Craft Art Development Foundation. She started to teach 5 unemployed women, mothers in the community, basic cooking, basic sewing, and first aid skills. These first 5 women she worked with her in a shed, which was run down, just starting to use basic equipment to try and help them to look after their families in a better way. Soon after she started, though, she realized that she didn't have nearly enough expertise or skills to take this project further. What she did is she then went back to university while keeping this project going and started researching exactly what she could do and what skills she had that she could transfer to these people. During her research, she found that craft is the 3rd biggest form of income in Africa. So the 3rd biggest form of income that people generate by producing craft. She then focused her objective for this project, called Mogalakwena Craft Art, onto producing 5 types of craft art: beadwork, embroidery, woodwork, weaving, and pottery. For those of you who don't know, who haven't read yet, craft art is defined as products that have a functional side and an aesthetic part to them and are produced with a hand. As she carried on learning about these skills and about the community, she found that many people in this area actually had inherent skills on how to do these things, but didn't have any form of market or any way of actually selling the products that they could make with these skills. She then decided that she had to formalize the business slightly more and set up a mission statement, as you can see there, focused on employment, skills, developing creativity, especially in the younger generations and children. And then the 3rd point there, documenting and preserving the indigenous knowledge systems of oral cultures. Now what this means is what I mentioned earlier, is that many people in this area are illiterate. So as modernization took place from the late 1990s, electricity was introduced, running water was introduced. Many of these people couldn't transfer their culture from one generation to the next in any way other than just by speaking about what they did and about stories. And what Mogalakwena Craft Art took as one of the parts of its mission was to actually document and preserve these traditional knowledge systems. So there we can see some of the products that the people are producing. Then in 2006, I enrolled here at the USB to study an MBA, to join the likes of you. And soon after I arrived here and started studying, not knowing anything about business really, I started realizing that what we were doing in practice was we were implementing a theory called social entrepreneurship. So similar to Shauna, we had no idea what we were doing. We just thought we can't just look at the bottom line. We can't just look at making money. And our definition, because there's no wider accepted definition of social entrepreneurship, our definition is the transformation of socially and environmentally responsible ideas into sustainable and profitable products and services. The triple bottom line that you'll always hear about: people, planet, and profits. And we added principles as our compass to guide us in where we want to go. So only after I started studying with my MBA and realizing that our lack of formalization was hampering us and not being able to grow quicker, but I learned about these definitions and this theory, and was I then able to take it back. So, being an MBA student, the first thing I wanted to do was set up a graph and tell people what I knew. So this is basically the evolution that we can now look back at from 2013 and say, well, this is exactly how it went. In 1994, Mogalakwena Craft Art was established, and we focused on skills training and development and empowerment. We then branched out to introduce workshops looking at children and unemployed people for skills training, first aid, and AIDS awareness, due to the reasons I explained earlier. Our focus became very quickly focused on marketable products for the South African market, looking at what we could produce to generate money to carry on doing these things. During this time, my mother studied a PhD on craft art and wrote a book about craft art in South Africa as well. Then in 2016, 2008, we realized that being in such a remote rural location, our products just had no way of getting here unless we just shipped them here, but not having any story to tell with it. We then opened a craft art gallery in Cape Town and started exporting to Europe and to the US as well. As I mentioned earlier, in 2006, when electricity was introduced to the area and the cultures were being lost, we then established a research center for African ecology and anthropology to document and preserve these cultures. And that's just one of the story panels that they produce to preserve the culture. You'll see there's some people who go out on full moon in the summertime to catch frogs, which they then eat. And first store in is there a laser on this? In big drums like that, and store them and dry them and eat them later. But this was one of the parts of the culture that was being lost totally, because people would switch on televisions and had no idea what the previous generations had done. Then in 2010, I graduated from the USB. I wrote my thesis on an international marketing strategy for the company, and we started exporting to Europe, and we had our first solar international exhibition and started working with higher profile artists. Our focus throughout this time was the triple bottom line, but not just doing it sustainably, but also profitably. So that's the MBA version of what we did. This is a graph that we discussed during employment relations during my studies. But this is basically the real way of what happened when we were developing this company. There are two axes there, trust and formalization. And I think this is a good way to look at small businesses and how you can develop and how you can scale them to make them bigger businesses. If you have low trust in a business and low formalization, you have chaos. And I'm sure all the entrepreneurs in the room would agree with that. If you have high formalization but low trust, you've got bureaucracy, and I think that occurs in a lot of big businesses these days. What we experienced was the small or family business side of it, where there was a lot of trust between employees and management or owners, but very little formalization, which means that it was focused a lot on the entrepreneurs ourselves and the employees trying to figure things out as we went along. And then the nirvana, the utopia that we all strive to is to have high formalization. Everybody knows exactly what their role is. But everybody trusts everybody as well. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs will look at formalization as an inhibitor, saying they don't like it because it stifles their creativity. What we look at in terms of formalization is we view it like a dance floor. If you have a clearly demarcated, level, clean dance floor, you can do any dance that you want on it. If you don't have a dance floor, or it's not clean, or it's not level, it's very, very difficult to do your dance on there. And you'll see the dance that we did. So we started in a small family business and had high trust, and everybody loved everybody until we started implementing systems and saying, well, this is how things are going to be done here from now on. And as we did that, everybody became suspicious, saying, well, why are you doing this all of a sudden? Why are you changing it? Are you trying to catch us out? Whatever. So we went through this phase of implementing systems and then losing the trust and then trying to regain it again. And we did that for a fair few years until the business grew to such a point where it became about 15 or 20 employees, and we did the same thing, but then our dance changed quite drastically. So every time we would implement something new, a new rule, a new system, a new way of doing things, we would do that dance between trust and the loss of trust. Only once we got to the point where enough of the theory had now sunk in for ourselves and for our employees that we get to the point where we could sit with them and work out systems of how we wanted to operate and get to a point of increasing the trust by increasing the formalization of the systems that we implemented in the business. One of the key learning elements for us to get to that point, I learned from a book by C.K. Prahalad called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, which I can highly recommend to you. And he says that only once we stop thinking of the poor as victims or as a burden, and only once they're recognized as resilient and creative entrepreneurs, and value-conscious consumers for that matter, will these opportunities open up. And for us, that was really key, because we had lots of interest from people all over the world wanting to donate. Donate books, donate time, donate money, but none of it ever went anywhere because there was no sense of self-entitlement of having worked for it. So only once we realized that these people weren't victims, but that they were actually resilient and creative, did we start working together. And then secondly, he says, what we need is a better approach, and this involves partnering with them to innovate and achieve sustainable win-win scenarios. Only once they are actively engaged and the companies providing these products and services are profitable as well, will social entrepreneurship be successful. So, winding down, what we found retrospectively, would have loved to do it the other way around, but was that we could replace this vicious cycle with a virtuous cycle of social development and environmental and economic abundance. So the situation, as I described earlier, we had social deterioration. This was manifest in many ways, in poverty, in crime, in poor family situations, high HIV situations throughout the area, which led to lower investment, lower economic growth, because businesses didn't want to be there. It was just a nightmare to be involved. More unemployment, more poverty, more crime was the effect. And these economic challenges we are now facing right throughout Africa, and in many parts, especially of rural South Africa. If we could then change this just a little bit by starting with an investment in skills training, we found that if we could make small changes, we could have a big effect on the triple bottom line areas, the people, planet, and profits. But if we could invest in skills training, this immediately helped us to provide better quality products and services. Once you have that, I mean, anybody will know from here, the waterfall continues in saying, then you have better business relationships. You're providing your products and services on time, and people want to be involved with you. From there, it was increased demand, increased revenue, increased employment, yes, but we're quite organic in our growth, so we took it slow, and the focus that we made was increased remuneration. So we all of a sudden had people working for us that were getting more money year on year as the company was doing better, seeing as they were the breadwinners for their families. So that value then spread out to the rest of the community. And from there, we had a situation of social development in this area. Due to the increased employment and increased remuneration, we then had the second generation of people also working for the company. So mothers would then bring their school-leaving daughters to work for the company, and that had a very big impact on the social development in the area. So here's another MBA way to look at it. Was once we realized that we had to change our focus from looking at products or places or developing and focusing on these products to looking at the people involved, both the employees, our business partners, and obviously our consumers, that we realized that much more value could be added. And that's where our social entrepreneurship really came through. Then in conclusion, this is one of my favorite quotes. There's a quote by our former President Nelson Mandela. And I think what he says here is very apt in describing what the USB is doing, as well as AMBA, through initiatives like this Global Leadership Conference. He says, I'm convinced that our region and our continent have set out along the new road of lasting peace, democracy, and social and economic development. The time has come for Africa to take full responsibility of her woes and to use the immense collective wisdom it possesses to make an ideal of the African Renaissance whose time has come. Thank you.